Welcome to an introduction to graded assignment number 5, launch checklist form. This is assignment to cover everything that you've learned now about the DOM, event handling, HTTP requests, user input with forms, JSON, and how to fetch JSON. So this assignment has a number of requirements, and it's got, several parts that you kind of can do one at a time. The first thing to know is that this page is not meant to go to another page when the user clicks submit on the form. So you want to make sure to use this prevent default method of the event once you capture it as part of the listener that you create to detect when that form has been submitted. And this will keep it from, reloading the page. That's important. The next part mentions how you want to validate the data that the user is submitting. And there's kind of two levels on which you want to do that. One is just to make sure that none of the fields are blank. And the other is to make sure that they're the right data types. So the first two are going to be strings, and the second two should be valid numbers. With validation, once it's past those things, then you can update this list that's kind of corresponds to each of those fields to say what's ready and what's not ready for the launch. And then you'll be able to change some text and some colors using the DOM and make it look a little different depending on whether it's good to go or not. The very last part is something that is actually at the top of the page visually, but it's where you're going to fetch some JSON with information about different planets. And then it lists out some facts and figures about it as the mission destination. So I'm going to get into what that looks like and all of the nitty gritty in a minute, but make sure that you have gotten your project repo set up and run it on your local machine. And then you should see this, which I actually have up and running right here. And we can see that we have 4 fields here, but the section up above is empty. That's where that planet data is going to go once you fetch it. But first, you're going to concentrate on this form and the information that's in this section down here. Each of these fields, like I said before, these 2 need to be strings. These 2 need to be valid numbers. And then when that button is submitted, you're going to, listen for that and then call a function that will handle the logic for, validating and all of that. We'll take a look at that in a second. They talk a little bit here about, what you should not edit, what you should not delete, just to make sure that all the tests can work properly. And you'll also see in the dev tools, if you're, open that up here, that when it first loads, it says, require is not defined. You can ignore that because that's just for the auto grader. Okay, so let's take a look at the code. So you can kind of get oriented here. First thing is there's a README file and you're going to want to read this. Here's a cool thing about VS Code. You can actually right click on a README file and say open preview. And then it shows it to you all nice and pretty. So let's look at this. We have, these same instructions here that were from the course book. But they also have a demo app that you're supposed to be able to check out. I actually, last time I checked this, it wasn't working, so I'm not going to click on it. But it talks a little bit about the grader. You can run npm test down here in the terminal. That should result in only one of those tests failing when you do it locally. But when you push your code to your repository in GitHub Classroom, they should all pass. Now, I found a couple of issues with a couple of tests. I'll talk about that later, so you kind of know what to expect. But this is the most important part. You want to read through this because these are all the things that you're going to need to be able to, verify and explain as part of your demo with your TA, because this is what they're going to be looking for. Do you have all the planetary data in the top box? when the form has validation issues, you know, is the page reloading? Do you have an alert appear if it's, you know, partially filled? Do you have an alert if there's incorrect data that can't be, you know, made the correct type? And then once you've validated, you know, do you have all of the correct messages and colors and things in that bottom box? And then they want, you know, just to make sure that all of your script file is set up properly with the listeners and calling the correct functions from a helper file. Because you can see over here, we've actually got script.js and script helper.js. And then, you know, making sure you haven't actually changed the styles, you're doing any style changes using DOM methods. This is very important. The instructions, as near as I can tell, do not include this link, but this is the link that you need, that the URL you need. If you look at it in the original, you can actually see the whole thing. Nope, it'll be down here. Yep. This is the API that they've set up for you to fetch the JSON from. So this is the URL you need in order to do that. So make sure you pay attention to this. Okay, so we've done the README. Let's take a look at the index. You can see this, you know, corresponds to exactly what you saw on the page, right? Here's that empty box, empty for now, where your fetched data will go. Here's the form. You've got the 4 fields and the submit button. And then here's this section down here. Right now, the only thing you see is this H2 that says awaiting information before launch. That's, you know, right here. And then there's this section down here that has 4 list items that are invisible. And that's this, you know, ID faulty items. So you only want to make this visible once you've determined that there's some sort of problem. And then after that, it will, you know, it'll stay. I thought for a while that you could actually, like, you know, make it hidden again if they actually got the things right the next time they tried, but apparently the way the tests are written, that's not true. So once you make it visible because one of these things is triggered, like, you know, the fuel level is not high enough or whatever, then you'll just keep it visible. So that means it's important to change this text to back if they had it wrong before, but then they have it, you know, correct again, because it's still going to be showing at that point. So just pay attention to what the correct messages are supposed to be, because the tests will actually check for specific messages. You know, is the cargo mass low enough? Is it too heavy? Is the fuel level high enough, or is it too low? The other things you want to check for are things like when you change this text, that you actually get it, it's case sensitive. So the first time I did this, I failed it because I didn't have the not and ready and launch capitalized. And then I realized I needed to do that. So you can, you know, double check by coming over these test files to make sure that you've got it coded so that these will pass with the exact text. Okay, so let's talk about the actual instructions. This talks through how to add the alerts, and they talk about this, you know, validate input function. So now we need to look at these scripts, right? Here's the script helper. This is where you've got 5 different functions that you're going to write. The first 2 are right here, actually. This one comes later. So validate input is where its only job is to take a string from a single field and then determine whether it's empty, not a number, or is a number. And there again, that case sensitivity is important there. So it should return one of those 3 strings depending on what's true. And they remind you down here, you can't use, you know, equality operators to check for not a number. You have to actually use this function is not a number to check for it, which will help you arrive at one of these 2. Once you have that helper function written, you're going to use that as part of your logic with the form submission. So form submission takes in a document. The document as it currently exists when the form is submitted which is going to come from here because you're going to set up your listeners and stuff in here. And so you feed that in, you give it the list of faulty items, and then these are intended to be, they say here, you know, the string values from the input fields themselves. So you'll need to access those and then pass them into this when you call it from the other file. And then inside here, you're going to write the logic that is going to check and see, you know, first, are things valid on the basis of whether they're, you know, any of them are empty, and then you're going to check them on the basis of whether they're the proper type, and have those alerts. And then you can move on and actually update the faulty items section and the launch status H2 that you see over here. That's this full section, launch status and faulty items. So they talk about, you know, making things visible once you have an issue. Fuel level is, you know, has to be less than 10,000 liters for that to change. And the cargo mass has to be more than 10,000 for that to change. And then, you know, that launch status text, not only do you change what it says, you also change the color. For red, they give you this hex code here, and you can also use the RGB values if you'd like. And then if everything is fixed and it's ready, then you want to change the text again to shuttle is ready for launch. And you want to change this to green. And I just realized this is why I had them lowercase, because that's what it says in here. So definitely make sure that you capitalize some of these words, and just, again, refer back to the tests here. Right there, shuttle not ready, and then of course the preposition for is lowercase, but everything else is uppercase. Yeah, because that is actually what the tests need to pass. So these are, I guess, not correct quite. Okay, so once you have done all of that, you should have all of that behavior, which I will demo for you in just a second. The second major part here is that top box. You want to fetch the planetary data and display its information there. So there's three parts. You're going to do the fetch itself. Then you're going to pick randomly a planet from the array of planets that comes back as JSON. And then the third one is just to, you know, this one, its only job is to manipulate the DOM so that you can put that HTML on the page. So each of these has a very distinct purpose. So let's go look at these. If you look back at the script helper, the first one, or actually the last one, is up here at the top, the add destination info, and they give you the exact HTML to use. All you have to do is insert the specific information that's coming in here that you're going to pass in, and pay attention to the actual JSON. Like over here, once you've fetched it, you can have it console logged and look at the actual key names, because they're not necessarily going to be exactly the same as these names. So just keep that in mind. That can trip you up. And just make sure you pass in everything that they ask for here when you call it from over here. So the first two, though, is to fetch. So you're going to just, you know, finish this so that you can actually have this return. And then from here, you'll be able to, you know, they tell you right here, set listed planets response equal to the value returned by calling my fetch. So this is where it's going to come into play. And then you'll be able to extract your results. Now, depending on how you do this, if you actually set this up where you unbox the JSON before you return it here, then you actually don't need a second .then here. You can just continue from here with the data unpackaged and be able to use it. So just keep that in mind. It's just going to depend on how much of the promise, the first promise, you handle here before you handle the second promise here. Or maybe you handle them both here. So keep that in mind. And then you will call your other function here, pick planet, which is where you're just going to get that array of planets that you have fetched, and then find a random index and return that object. And then that's the object that you'll be able to access all of its properties and pass into this one to get this displayed on the page. Okay, so that's all the code. One thing I did find that I ran up against was in here when I started using some of those functions that are being exported from Script Helper. VS Code was trying to be helpful and automatically adding import statements at the top, and then it was causing errors because the way that everything has been set up here, you actually don't need to import them explicitly. They're already going to be available. So if that happens, you might get an error in the console that says, it's already been declared. Just remove any import statements that VS Code added in for you so that it just is accessing it through the files. Okay, let me demo it, and then I'm going to talk about the tests a little bit. So in order to demo it, I need to switch to, and I need to get off of this. Here we go. I'm going to switch branches. Get checkout solution. Okay. Now I can come over here and you can see that I'm getting a random, planet each time, and it has a unique picture and unique information, and it's displaying in this box. There's that error they told you not to worry about. And then here you can see I have, this is the console log that they had in there. And then I added a console log to actually take a look at the names of these keys for just a single object and see each one. So that's that second part of the planetary fetching. Let's talk about the form. One of the important things here is that you test this out the wazoo, like test it several different ways, because you want to check for those alerts you're creating. So let's say right now, I just leave these all blank and I hit submit. I get the alert that says all fields are required. If I have things in here that are, otherwise correct. So let's say we go to Han and Chewy as the co-pilot, and then we say, only 8,000 liters of fuel. And then, maybe the cargo is below 10,000. So it's okay. So this one's the one that's the problem. I can actually, that's not what I meant to do. Okay, so let's say you actually, I still want to talk about the validation. Let's say now none of them are blank, but one of them is the wrong data type. You cannot convert the letter A into a number, right? So that's where you would see, this other alert. Make sure to enter valid information for each field. So that's the idea. Now, let's say you get past the validation. Everything is correctly a number and a string for the first two. But this is out of range, and that's where, it's not going to be ready for launch. Here's what should happen when you submit. That changes to red. It says shuttle not ready for launch. And then you see all four of these list items within this faulty items list. And this one says fuel level too low for launch. The pilots and co-pilots names are here. And this one, still says cargo mass low enough for launch. What if I switch it and I do the other one, the other way around, and I say there's plenty of fuel, but there's way too much cargo, right? Then we see it switch, fuel level high enough for launch, cargo mass too heavy for launch. But let's say I finally get it right and I, make this below 10,000 again and I submit. Now we see all the messages are what they should be. This is green. It says shuttle is ready for launch. So play around with that. You want to make sure that everything changes not only to the message for the negative, but if the user gets it right, you want to make sure it changes back. So that's important when you're handling all of your logic for how it's evaluating whether things are in range or not. Okay, so that's how it should work. This is what it looks like. Let's go over to the tests and just talk about this for a minute. They have all these tests. Up here is all the setup for everything, where they create everything they need to run their tests. They've got their own way of getting the objects from the DOM here. And then they start testing for things. They test for, does your validate input function correctly handle, produce the correct string for each of the types of things that it might have been evaluating. Here, it's talking about before the form is submitted, do these things all have the correct information still from the HTML? Now, here's the problem with this one. It only passes if the inline styling has been added to HTML, which it has not been. So in order to get mine to pass, I actually came in and added this, style equals visibility hidden. Because the problem is the DOM does not know how to read a CSS file. The CSS file is definitely going to say visibility hidden for faulty items. So if you find that not passing because it's saying it's finding an empty string instead of hidden, then you can just come in here and add this, and then you should be good. Okay, so the other ones are fine. And then down here at the very bottom, I noticed that there's a couple things here. One is that to be true on all of these was not actually being called, that you have to add those parentheses to make sure that otherwise it's just a false positive. So if you really truly want to test it, make sure you add those parentheses. This one also had a typo, destination info instead of destination. And then, it didn't have the parentheses, but it turns out they actually are testing for this in the other file. So if we go over to the grading fetch file, you'll see that the last test here is that they do test that. But the same thing was a problem. So I added these parentheses to make sure it was actually testing it. And then the same thing here to make sure that you are handling your, random planet function correctly. So just make sure that all of those are actually being called. So when you do that, if you've got everything set up and you run npm test locally, then it's going to go through and run everything. And the only one that should fail is this fetch is not defined. And that's just because of the asynchronicity issue with local testing. It's no problem. So you should have 11 specs, 1 failure locally if you have everything set up where these tests will pass. And then if you go to your actual, oh, here we go, actions. Okay. You can come in and see that the first time when I had some things that weren't quite right, it failed. But then when I ran it again, everything passed, including that one that wasn't passing locally. This is what you're hoping to see. Now, having said all of that, if your TA, you demo this and you show your TA that everything works exactly as it's supposed to, and you still aren't passing, it's not a problem. But I know some people really want to try to get this fixed. So this is what it looks like if you do. Okay, so I think that's everything that I really wanted to point out. Just, be really thoughtful about how you approach this, because they do give you the information you need between the instructions here, if you read it really carefully, and between there and the README, you should be able to be very clear about what it is you need to do and where the information that you need, like this API URL right here, it's what you need. But it just takes a little perseverance, a little trial and error. Make sure that you 100% are checking this in the DOM as you're working on it. Use lots of console logs. Like you can see right here, I was checking the value of visible, and I forgot to delete that. But use that kind of stuff to help you as part of development. This is what developers do every day. So yeah, have fun with it. And if you do want some extra practice, well, first of all, you're going to find this assignment incredibly difficult if you have not done the prep exercises from the chapters and your studios. They are, the reason you need to do those is to prepare you for this. So if you haven't done those, you need to find the time probably, and then you'll find this a lot less frustrating. That being said, when you've given this your best and you're just truly stuck, you can go to office hours and catch up classes and work with TAs on that. Just make sure you get your demos in well ahead of time, especially coming up against that deadline at the very end of the unit. I do have some things on my website here. This inspired design doesn't have any forms or any fetching of JSON. It's just about manipulating the DOM if you just want to practice that part. Then this one, my GitHub actually calls it number 3 because it's the most recent one that I created, but this is definitely the one you want to do first because trivia time is more complex. So I would say, definitely start with this one once you're ready to work on the form stuff and the validation and fetching and all of that. Okay, so good luck with this one. It can be a lot of fun once you're really comfortable with all these concepts. So I wish you the best of luck, and I will see you in the next video.